Hello, this is the Council on Independent Fundamental Bible Doctrine. This is my next video. It is a video on another misunderstood passage, being the James 2 passage, the justification of faith and faith's justification. Many people think this passage is a passage where Paul and James conflict, but I'm going to show you that Paul and James fit perfectly together. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get started. Before we get started on the actual passage, there is a verse that James gives us ahead of that passage so that we don't misunderstand that passage. Okay, let's look at that verse first. That verse is James 2:9. But if ye have respect of persons, ye commit sin, and are convinced of the law as transgressors. For whosoever shall keep the whole law, and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. Why? Well, simple, because when you sin one time, that puts you in the only way to heaven is through the forgiveness of sin category. You can no longer get to heaven through the avoidance of sin category, or turning from your sin. Okay? Because the only way you can be made perfect is through forgiveness once you've sinned one time. Okay? So what does he say? He goes on. For he that said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. Now if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law. So if you've done no adultery but you kill, you're still a transgressor of the law, regardless of the fact that you have not killed in the similitude of Adam, sinned in the similitude of Adam, or committed adultery or something. But look at where he starts. He starts with respect of persons, a very tiny, easy to commit sin that most all Christians, if not all humans, have already committed. Okay, if you judge somebody wrongly by their appearance, if you give somebody a little more leeway because you know the family they come from, or you know somebody that knows them, okay, and you act differently towards this person than you do another person, okay, for whatever reason or whatever assumptions you may have made, any wrong judgment in the area of respecting of persons, and you've committed a sin. Very easy to do sin, okay? If you do that sin, but you do no adultery and no killing, no murdering, okay, you're still guilty of all because you're still a transgressor of the law. Which means the only way to heaven is through the forgiveness category, because that's the only way you can be made perfect. You can no longer be made perfect. Once you sin one time, you are a transgressor of the law, and you can only get to heaven through forgiveness, not your works. Once you sin one time. Okay, so that is why he is alerting us to this, because he's getting ready to talk about a difficult subject to understand, and that's justification through works. Okay, but he wants to make sure you understand that you cannot be eternally justified by your works. It's already too late for that. Okay, now respect of persons is a very small sin. Okay, but it's an important sin. All sin is important to avoid. Okay, but here's the thing. Okay, these are serious sins. God understands that some sins are more serious than others. Like when he was in the garden and being arrested, and he said unto them, he who hath brought thee to me hath the greater sin. Okay, or the passage where it talks about, if any man offend one of these little ones, it would be better for him to have a millstone tied around his neck and be thrown into the ocean. Okay, the whole Old Testament, some sins were given a punishment of death and some were not. Okay, so God understands in humanity that some sins are worse than others. But understand, okay, that the Mosaic law was a lowering of the standard, a lowering of the severity. Okay? What he's saying here is if you don't commit any adultery and you don't kill anybody, okay, but you have ever made a misjudgment based on respecting of persons, you're still guilty of transgressing the law. The wages of sin is death. Okay, the heavenly standard is so much more strict than the Mosaic standard. This results in eternal death in hell, as does all sin, no matter how small it is. See, sins have different severities. Some sins are more serious than others, okay? But all sin is an equal distance from God that can only be traversed through the blood of Christ. Okay? If you don't have the blood of Christ, you're condemned to death for the smallest of sins. All sin is worthy of death by the heavenly standard. Okay? Because perfection is the heavenly standard. Okay? And all sin results in death. Okay? So James reminds us we are all sinners, and the only way to heaven is through the forgiveness of sin category. Not sin avoidance, not turning from your sin. Okay? Or the law, so to speak, as turning from your sin is following the law. Turn from your sin. Don't steal. Okay? Thou shalt not steal. Okay? Same thing. So we don't become confused. That's why James gives us this passage, because he doesn't want us to be confused about what he is about ready to discuss in the justification by works. So let's go ahead and let's look at it. The first verse of that passage, okay, James 2:14, has two possibilities. Let's read one. What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works? Can faith save him? Okay, the first interpretation of this passage that most people have, including myself, when you first read it, is what doth it profit the man who says he has faith? Okay, what doth it profit? He's addressing the brethren. Okay, so my brethren, what doth it profit when a man say he hath faith, his profession saying, but he has no works? Can faith save him? Spiritual salvation of the man who claims to have the faith. Okay, that is option one. I'm going to go ahead and answer this option, okay, for those of you who believe it. He is not asking, can faith save him? He is asking, can this faith, okay, false faith, save him? He's bringing into question the guy's faith because he has no works. So what the question he's actually asking is, can false faith save the man? Okay? That is how you answer option one of this passage, if that is the way you're looking at it. Now, the reason I say there's a possible second option is because now he gets into a picture. Okay, he gives an illustration 2 verses long. Okay, the illustration, okay, is of a different schematic. The illustration is of this. What doth it profit my brethren? Okay, how does it profit my brother if a man say he has faith and has not works? Can faith save, physical salvation, the brother? Let me show you the illustration. If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding you give them not those things which are needful for the body, what doth it profit? What doth it profit the brother or sister be naked, destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be ye warmed? They're cold, they're naked, they're starving. Okay, so what doth it profit the brother who is in need of physical salvation if a man says he has faith but has no works. He just says, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but doesn't actually do any good works by giving them some canned goods, giving them some clothes that they never wear anymore. Okay? What does it profit the brother who's in need of physical salvation if a man says he has faith and have not works? Now, there's a couple different possibilities. Okay? An illustration is usually given to clarify the statement that was just made. Okay, that's why I say this up here. Even though the statement sounds like it's option 1, I have to consider that at least consider that it could be option 2, because this is definitively option 2. And if the illustration is being made to further explain the statement that was already made, okay, then the statement already made is option 2, definitively, because this is definitive. Okay, it's clear. And as we know, as I said, many statements that are made are followed by an illustration to give clarity to what was actually meant in the statement that was made. Okay, that's one option. Or he could be teaching two things. He could make the statement and give an illustration to make an additional point. Okay, that is not how an illustration is used most of the times, but it can be. Okay, so he could be saying both. You know, false faith can't save you. Okay, can false faith save him? No, it can't. Okay, all right, but understand, this is definitively, what doth it profit the brethren, okay, who are in need of physical salvation, if a man says he has faith, okay, but has no works to go with it? All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next one. It could be one, it could be the other, or it could be both. Okay. You're probably going to have to discover the link between this and this, if this is an illustration of that. Very seldom do you ever run into anything in the King James Bible that you can't manage without going to the Greek. But you probably would need somebody who speaks fluent English and fluent Greek with a copy of the Textus Receptus to actually be able to tell you if the two are linked, if this is an illustration of that, for sure. Okay, and I don't speak Greek, so I can't tell you for sure which way it is. So I'm giving you the answer for both, and neither are teaching you that you're saved by works. Okay, see, salvation, even if it's spiritual, spiritual salvation, eternal spiritual salvation of your eternal soul can never be the profit, okay, of a man's works. Can't happen. Okay, you cannot earn it. You cannot merit it. It's done on Christ's work through his blood sacrifice. Okay, so it definitely does not mean that. Okay, as we will see, as James steers way clear of that, and we're going to see clearly what this passage is telling us. Okay, all right. Even so, just like we just talked about, faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Okay, be careful. One of the ways people get led into false teaching and error these days is they assume something from a word or phrase. Okay? If it hath not works, is dead. Dead does not mean you lose your salvation. Okay? Or you don't have salvation. That would be reading something into the term that may or may not be there. And when you balance it with other scripture, a lot of other scripture, you realize that that's not what dead means. Okay? Even so, faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. It is laying lifeless. Okay? It's worthless. That's what he's saying. Okay? How do we know he's saying it's worthless? Because it's not being used or utilized by having works. Well, that's why worthless is the opposite of profit. What shall it profit, my brethren? Okay? He is trying to teach a principle on faith that without works, it's not profiting anybody. Okay? That's what he's saying. Okay? See, being alone, faith alone is not profiting anybody, because you can have faith. If you don't do any works, your faith is laying dormant. It's not assisting anybody. It's not profiting anyone. Okay? As is the second example. Your brother is not profiting by it. Okay? All right? No one is profiting by it. Okay? All right. Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Yea, a man may say. Okay? What is being justified here is the profession of faith. Okay? What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith? Okay? Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith. Okay? We're talking about the justification of your profession of faith. Okay? We are not talking about what Paul talks about, the justification of your eternal soul. Okay? Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Okay? Who is he presenting his works to? Okay, he's not presenting his works to God. He's presenting them to the other man. You show me your works and I'll show you my works. Okay? He's presenting the works to man. So he is justifying the profession of faith by works to other men. He is not justifying his eternal soul to God by faith. Every part of the justification, every piece, is different than the justification that Paul talks about. Okay? Let's go on. James 2:19, thou believest that there is one God, thou doest well. Okay, he stays specifically short of salvation faith. Okay, there is one God. Why is he staying specifically short of salvation? He doesn't want you to get confused. He's teaching something about a principle of faith, general faith, not of salvation. Okay, he does not say, thou believest that Jesus is the Son of God and that he died on the cross for your sins and was buried and rose again the third day according to the scriptures. Okay, he says, you believe there is one God, thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble. Okay, so what is he saying? He said, devils have evil works and they believe. So James is teaching a general principle on faith. He's not teaching on salvation. He's teaching you can believe and be worthless to God, unprofitable, if the devils can believe and be adverse to God. Okay? Devils have evil works and believe. You can be worthless and believe. Okay? You have to have works with your faith to make it profitable. Okay? And he specifically stays away from the salvation belief. Okay, because the demons are not the only group that believes there is one God that are unsaved. Okay, Muslim religion believes in one God. Jewish religion that has denied Christ. Okay, they believe there's one God. Okay, there are a lot of monotheistic religions. Okay, he is just teaching us that if the devils can have bad works and believe in one God, then we can have no works and be worthless, unprofitable, okay, if our faith is alone, okay, see? But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? Okay, faith is profitable when it is active, not when it's laying lifeless like dead. And not so when it is laying lifeless, not doing anything, or alone. See, that's his problem. He doesn't want faith to be alone without works. Okay, and we're going to understand the difference between Paul's faith alone and James's faith not being alone. And we're going to understand it, okay, right now. James 2:21, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Seest thou how faith wrought with his works? And by works was faith made perfect or complete or authenticated? Okay. And the scripture was fulfilled that saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. Paul says that. That is when Abraham was saved. Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. Paul stops there because Paul was talking about salvation. James does not. And he was called the friend of God. People, that is your walk with God after the salvation experience where Christ where righteousness is imputed unto you. He was the friend of God. That is your walk with God after you're saved. When he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar. That event happened after this event by a good ways. Okay, James is talking about, okay, being justified by your faith, being justified by your works. Your profession of faith is justified by your works after you're saved. Okay, just remember verse 18. And I will show thee my faith by my works. You can't demonstrate your faith by works unless you have faith before you have the works. Okay, that's the thing. Paul is talking about the lack of relationship between works and salvation leading up to the point you're saved. You are not saved by your works, you're saved by faith, and faith alone. Okay? James is saying once you get saved in your walk with God, you should have works. Faith should not be alone. Okay? We're not even talking about the same time period in a Christian's life. Okay? Paul is talking about the time period before you're saved, leading up to your salvation, that there's no works that you can do to be justified before God. Different definition of justification. Just as if you'd never sinned, being presented to God justified. Okay, James is talking about authenticating your profession of faith to other men after you've been saved. Okay. And I will show thee my faith by my works. You can't demonstrate your faith by works unless you have faith. Okay? All right? So let's go on. But that is why Okay. That is why. Okay. That is why faith without works is dead, being alone. Because James is talking about after salvation, you should have works, and your faith is unprofitable to others, okay, your brothers, once you have been saved, as you should have works. Faith should not be alone. Okay. Paul is talking about you're saved by faith alone, as you don't have works prior to salvation that give you the salvation. Okay? Two different time periods. All right, so let's go on. So, you can't demonstrate true faith by works without first having the true faith for which the works are to be a demonstration. You must have faith before the demonstration of the faith. You can't have the result of true faith without having true faith first. Okay? All this is the cart before the horse argument again. Just like the Romans 10. You can't confess Christ until you have Christ. You can't confess faith until you have faith. You can't call upon the Lord unless you have first believed. Okay? And you can't go around sharing your faith with others unless you have the faith to share. Okay? All of these false teachings, and these errors that people get into in the James passage, the Romans 10 passage, is because they got the cart before the horse again and again and again. Okay? Hebrews 11:6, but without faith it is impossible to please God. Okay? For he that cometh to God must believe. Okay? You have to believe and have faith, okay, before you can do works that honor God. But without faith it is impossible to please God, because you haven't even believed in God yet. You can't do works to please God if you haven't believed in Him yet. You have to believe the gospel first. Okay? Then you can please God with works. Then you can call upon Him. Then you can confess Him. Then you can witness to others about the faith that you have. Okay? The summary comparison. Paul is talking about the just as if I had never sinned justification of our eternal soul to God by faith, and works non-relationship to salvation leading up to our salvation. James is talking about the authentication, justification of our profession of faith to other men by works, and works relationship to salvation after we're saved. Okay, these are all color-coded. Okay, just as if I had never sinned definition, the authentication, justification definition. Justification of our eternal soul versus profession of faith. Justification to God versus to other men. Justification by faith versus justification by works. Justification in the time leading up to our salvation, and justification after we are saved. Okay? They're different. Paul's justification and James's justification, totally different things. In fact, the only thing that is the same is the English translated word justification. It doesn't even mean the same thing. If you've got something that has this many differences, even though it's the same word, it's not even the same meaning. Okay? It's two totally different things. And dispensationalism, okay, is just a flaky way of trying to fix this, okay? Because dispensational itself is not even accurate, So what you have is you have two contemporaries. Paul and James lived during the same time. Okay? When you can't say that it was different back then, okay? Because they're both using the same example of Abraham. And Abraham lived during the same time as Abraham. Okay? So when Paul says Abraham was justified by faith and not by works, That's Abraham. When James is saying Abraham was justified by his works, not just his faith, that's Abraham. And Abraham lived at the same time as Abraham. Okay? And James lived at the same time as Paul. Okay? So you don't give examples from the past to teach you how it works now to prove that it is different. James and Paul were both saying it works now like it did back then. That's why they're given examples of Abraham. They're not given examples of Abraham saying it works now like it did back then to show that it works differently now than it did back then. It works the same. Okay? They're just different justifications. They're not talking about your eternal soul to God by faith. That's Paul. Your justification of your profession of faith to men by works. That's James. And Paul is talking about before you're saved, leading up to your salvation, and James is talking about from your salvation forward. Okay? So, our original question, what doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works, can faith save him? That is either talking about the spiritual salvation, okay? And if so, it's talking about can the false faith save him? Okay? Or it's the second version, and it's talking about physical salvation of the brother. How does it profit the brethren? Okay? Because the one key we can get from all this is that James is not talking about the justification of your eternal soul to God by works. Okay? Because spiritual salvation can never be the profit received of a man's works. Okay? Cannot be. The Bible is so against it, it ain't even funny. It preaches against it from one end of the Bible to the other. Okay? It just cannot be. So we see that James and Paul are talking about two very different things. Okay? One, again, is for the last time, justification of our eternal soul to God by faith in the time period leading up to our salvation. And the other is the justification of our profession of faith to other men by works after we've been saved. Okay? Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it helps in your understanding of James 2.